I knew my career was over when I saw my face taped to the security desk with "Do not let him back" on the floor scrawled in red marker underneath. That was Wednesday afternoon at 4:47 p.m. By Friday morning, their $300 million merger was dead in the water, and they were calling me every 10 minutes begging me to come back. But let me back up a little. My name's William Patterson. I'm 47 years old, and until that Wednesday, I'd been keeping CoreTech Industries running like a Swiss watch for 12 solid years. Not the glamorous kind of work that gets you featured in company newsletters or invited to executive golf outings. I was the compliance guy, the one who made sure our legal frameworks actually worked and our federal protocols passed inspection. You know, the boring stuff that nobody thinks about until it breaks at 2 a.m. and suddenly everyone's career is on fire. That morning started normal enough. I had 3 monitors glowing on my desk, 2 lukewarm cups of coffee going cold, and a stack of merger documentation that represented what everyone kept calling the deal of the century. The whole office was buzzing about our upcoming acquisition by Macrovia Group, $300 million that would either launch us into the big leagues or sink us like a concrete life preserver. Behind me, the usual startup circus was in full swing. Project managers strutting around like they'd invented productivity, developers arguing about coding languages like it was a religious war, and some intern playing the same Post Malone song on repeat until I seriously considered introducing his AirPods to my paper shredder. And there I sat in my corner spot, the guy nobody noticed until something went catastrophically wrong. See, here's what they never understood about me at CoreTech. I wasn't just some paper pusher marking time until retirement. I was a former Marine who'd learned that attention to detail keeps people breathing, and I'd spent 12 years applying that same precision to keep this company breathing. Every system I built, every protocol I designed, every legal framework I constructed, it all had contingency plans because I knew someday these hotshot executives would step on a landmine and try to pin the explosion on someone like me. The merger documentation was spread across my desk like a military operation map. My name sat right there on the federal paperwork. William R. Patterson, third-party signatory, neutral witness, federal compliance liaison. I was the only person in the entire company with that level of security clearance. The certification process alone took 6 months of background checks and psychological evaluations that made Marine Corps training look like a weekend camping trip. They'd handed me the keys to the kingdom, then promptly forgot I had them. Which suited me just fine. There's real power in being invisible. You get to work quietly while the loud people exhaust themselves with meetings about meetings. The only folks who really grasped how critical my role was were the ones who understood just how fragile this whole house of cards actually was. Patricia Collins in our legal department, Andrew Foster over at Macrovia's compliance office, and my old supervisor before he retired to fish in Lake Erie like every other burned-out corporate veteran. Everyone else just saw me as Will from compliance. Quiet, middle-aged, probably counting days until his pension kicked in. Then Brian Hayes showed up as our new chief operating officer, and that's when the warning bells should have started ringing. This guy was 34 years old, all sharp suits and sharper teeth, throwing around phrases like disrupting legacy paradigms and optimizing human capital for maximum operational velocity. He had that Silicon Valley messiah complex, the kind of person who thinks innovation is a personality trait and uses business buzzwords like incantations that'll magically transform reality. I'll never forget his first company-wide meeting. He stood at the front of our main conference room like a motivational speaker at a pyramid scheme convention, talking for 47 minutes straight about modernization and digital transformation, basically calling everyone over 35 dead weight without having the spine to say it directly. The younger crowd clapped like he was Steve Jobs rising from the grave. I just sat there quietly fixing a data bridge integration that would have crashed our entire client portal system if I hadn't caught the error. But I should have seen what was coming. In my experience, when corporate wants to mess with your life, they always do it on a Wednesday with free pastries. The email landed in my inbox at 9:13 a.m. sharp. All hands mandatory meeting, 10 a.m. conference room alpha. Exciting organizational updates and strategic realignments. Attendance required. That's corporate translation for someone important is about to get terminated, and we want the whole company watching when it happens. Brian positioned himself at the front of the room like he was delivering a State of the Union address. He smiled way too much, gestured like he was conducting an invisible orchestra, and managed to work the word synergy into every other sentence. When he started discussing right-sizing our legacy operational overhead, I knew exactly whose head was heading for the chopping block. 3 hours later, Diana Rodriguez from HR knocked on my office door. This time she wasn't carrying paperwork for me to sign. She brought 2 colleagues, one clutching a clipboard like it contained state secrets, and another who looked like she'd rather be getting a root canal. "Will, could we have a private word?" They escorted me to a side conference room like I was carrying something contagious. No pleasantries, no offer of water, just a manila envelope sliding across the conference table like divorce papers. The termination letter was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak. Evolving organizational priorities, strategic workforce optimization, role consolidation, initiatives. But stripped of all the fancy language, it came down to 4 simple words. You're fired, get out. I was still processing the bureaucratic nonsense when the clipboard lady announced, "You'll need to surrender your security badge and company laptop before 5 p.m. today." Her partner chimed in with, "Building security has been notified of your status change." Status change. Like I'd been downgraded from human being to potential security threat in the span of a morning meeting. I stood up, walked toward the door, and that's when I spotted it. Right there on the reception desk where they usually kept forgotten keys and half-dead office plants, someone had printed out a photo of my face, scrawled across it in red marker, "Do not let him back on the floor, not former employee William Patterson, not please escort Mr. Patterson out." Just my face with a warning label like I was radioactive waste that might contaminate their precious startup culture. That moment hit me like a freight train loaded with broken promises. I'd trained 3 different chief technology officers from scratch. I'd kept their biggest business deal alive through 2 SEC investigations and a federal compliance audit that should have buried most companies. I'd sacrificed weekends, holidays, family dinners, and important family milestones to babysit their server migrations and emergency legal reviews. And this was my reward. A photo on a desk with a threat warning. I didn't break down crying. That would have given them satisfaction they hadn't earned. Instead, I walked back to my cubicle with military bearing and started packing my personal belongings into a cardboard box someone had helpfully provided. A coffee mug that said "World's Most Average Dad," a Father's Day gift from my kids, a stress ball shaped like a hand grenade that my old Marine buddy had given me as a joke, a half-used notebook filled with network diagrams and compliance checklists that represented 12 years of institutional knowledge they were throwing away. The whole office had suddenly developed acute interest in their computer screens. Nobody made eye contact. My assistant Sean managed to mouth, "I'm really sorry," from across the floor. I nodded back and kept packing. But before I left that building, I made 2 very deliberate decisions. First, I walked to the security desk and handed over my badge without creating any drama. No angry speeches about loyalty and dedication. No threats about how they'd regret this decision. Just quiet professionalism, even though they'd forfeited any right to expect it. Second, I sat in my car in the parking lot, pulled out my secure phone, and opened the encrypted application that contained my federal compliance credentials. I found the digital cryptographic key tied to my personal authorization certificate, the one that verified my identity for every single Macrovia integration handshake. And I deleted it. Not a password they could reset, not a file they could recover, a unique cryptographic signature that confirmed William R. Patterson was authorized to approve federal compliance protocols on behalf of Cortec Industries. Without that key, their verification system couldn't confirm who was signing what. Without that signature, the merger couldn't proceed to final closing. Without me, they were holding a $300 million live grenade with the pin already pulled. I didn't smile, didn't feel vindicated, didn't even experience satisfaction. I just drove home with steady hands and a clear conscience because they thought they were moving their company forward, but they'd actually just incinerated the only bridge they couldn't rebuild. My house felt strange when I walked through the front door. Too quiet. No Slack notifications buzzing every 30 seconds. No emergency phone calls about servers crashing in the middle of dinner. No "Hey Will," quick question emails that somehow always turned into 4 hours of unpaid overtime troubleshooting someone else's crisis. I didn't even take off my jacket. Just stood in the living room holding that cardboard box, staring at the remains of my corporate life like it belonged to someone else entirely. Then I went to my home office and retrieved a fireproof file cabinet I kept locked behind my desk. Inside were folders I'd organized with the same precision I'd learned in the Marines. Legal documentation, security clearances, protocol specifications, and most importantly, contingency plans. I'd assembled these files 2 years earlier, Not because I was paranoid about getting fired, but because I'd spent over a decade watching executives make ambitious promises they couldn't deliver, and then scramble to find someone else to blame when reality came calling. The folder I needed was labeled Macrovia Acquisition Protocols, Original Documentation. Every page had my name printed at the bottom. William R. Patterson, Certified Third-Party Liaison, Neutral Compliance Authority, Federal Authorization Signatory. I flipped through the technical specifications until I found page 47, section 7, clause 9c. The language was dense legal prose, but the meaning was crystal clear. Termination of the named liaison without formal substitution procedures and recertification voids compliance status and suspends all legal standing of acquisition protocols pending resolution. Translated into normal English, fire the guy whose signature you need without replacing him with someone who has identical clearance, and your multi-million-dollar deal becomes worthless paper. I sat there staring at that clause, remembering all the meetings where executives had glossed over the fine print because they were too busy congratulating themselves about their brilliant business strategy. They'd handed me enough power to destroy their entire company, then completely forgot they'd done it. This wasn't revenge in any traditional sense. This wasn't sabotage or corporate espionage. This was simple structural engineering. Remove the keystone from an arch, and the whole thing collapses under its own weight. I opened my secure laptop and verified that the deletion I'd made from my phone had propagated through the federal compliance database. There it was, timestamped at 4:47 p.m. Authorization key permanently revoked, no recovery possible. The system was designed that way for security reasons. Once you pulled your credentials, there was no putting them back. Tomorrow morning, when Macrovia tried to run their final verification checks for the signing ceremony, they'd hit a brick wall with flashing red error messages. I made myself a sandwich, watched some old episodes of Andy Griffith, and went to bed early. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking up to check my phone for emergency work messages. The call came at exactly 8:23 a.m. Thursday morning. Macrovia Compliance Department, this is Andrew Foster speaking. Morning, Andrew. Will Patterson here. Just wanted to touch base about tomorrow's signing ceremony. I could hear papers shuffling, keyboard clicking. Oh, hey, Will. Perfect timing, actually. We were planning to run our final authorization checks this afternoon. The whole executive team's flying in tonight for the 10 a.m. ceremony tomorrow. Yeah, that's what I wanted to discuss with you. There's been a development on my end that might affect the timeline. Long pause. Computer keys stopped clicking. What kind of development? CoreTech terminated my employment yesterday afternoon. I'm no longer authorized to represent them in any official capacity. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Did you say they fired you? Correct. Badge revoked, systems access terminated, officially separated from the company as of 4:30 p.m. yesterday. But Will, his voice cracked slightly. You're the named liaison on every piece of documentation. Your credentials are hardwired into our verification protocols. Your authorization signature is required for final compliance approval. We can't just substitute someone else at the last minute. I understand the situation, Andrew. That's exactly why I'm calling to give you formal notice. Will, you realize what this means. We can't proceed without your sign-off. The entire deal structure is built around your federal certification. Our legal team specifically verified that you'd be handling the compliance authorization. I'll have my attorney send official documentation within the hour confirming my separation from CoreTech. Wait. Don't hang up. Is there any chance this is some kind of mistake? Maybe a misunderstanding that can be resolved? No misunderstanding. They were very clear about my status. I saw my photo taped to the security desk with instructions not to let me back in the building. Another long silence. Then, Jesus Christ. Will, our entire executive committee is already on planes. We've got board members flying in from 3 different countries. The press announcement is scheduled for noon tomorrow. I'm sorry, Andrew. I wish I had better news. I hung up and immediately called Rachel Stone, the employment attorney I'd kept on retainer for situations exactly like this. Rachel was sharp as a surgical blade and twice as precise. Within 20 minutes, she'd drafted a formal notification letter that would land on Macrovia's legal desk like a guided missile. William R. Patterson no longer represents CoreTech Industries in any professional, contractual, or advisory capacity, effective immediately. All federal compliance duties tied to the Macrovia acquisition have ceased. This separation is permanent and irrevocable. By the time that letter hit their inbox, Every automated system in Macrovia's compliance department was screaming error messages. Final signature authorization. Failed. Third-party verification. Key not found. Federal liaison confirmation. Access denied. Then I did something that probably wasn't mature, but felt absolutely necessary. I sent Sean a text message. Might want to review Clause 9C in the merger documentation. Just a thought. Hope you're hanging in there. His response came back in under 3 minutes. What the hell is Clause 9C? Everything's going crazy here. Legal is screaming at Brian. The CFO locked himself in his office. Did you know something like this could happen? I didn't reply. Sometimes the best education comes from watching the foundation crumble and realizing you should have paid more attention to the guy who built it. By noon Thursday, the tremors had reached Cortex executive floor. Macrovia's legal team had called an emergency conference with Brian Hayes and the general counsel. I heard through my remaining contacts that the meeting lasted 6 minutes. Macrovia's position was simple. No Will Patterson signature, no deal, period. Brian apparently tried to negotiate alternatives. Interim authorization, emergency substitution procedures. Temporary workarounds. Macrovia's response was the same every time. We don't accept provisional compliance under federal acquisition regulations. The rest of Thursday was spent in damage control meetings that accomplished exactly nothing. You can't negotiate with federal law, and you can't substitute for credentials that take months to obtain. Friday morning arrived like a funeral procession. The merger signing ceremony was supposed to be Cortex's moment of corporate glory. Executive teams in matching suits, photographers, champagne, the whole production. Instead, 10 a.m. came and went with empty conference rooms and canceled catering. Brian Hayes stood in the main meeting space at 10:15, still holding on to hope like a life preserver made of tissue paper. You know how these big corporations operate, he told the gathered staff. Lots of bureaucratic processes, slow decision-making. We'll resolve this internally and reschedule. But word about Clause 9C had already leaked to the company's Slack channels. Within 2 hours, everyone knew that the quiet guy from compliance had somehow become their biggest nightmare. The general counsel was demanding to know who had authorized my termination without reviewing merger requirements. HR was scrambling to find documentation proving they'd followed proper procedures. Legal was desperately trying to locate backup compliance pathways that didn't exist. My phone started ringing at 12:30 p.m. Unknown number, declined. Cortex mainline, declined. Brian's direct extension, declined. At 2:15, a voicemail from the chief financial officer. Will, look, I know this situation is less than ideal, but we've encountered a small procedural snag with today's signing. Could we possibly connect for a brief conversation? Nothing complicated, just some administrative details to clarify. Please call me back as soon as you get this. I played the message twice, then deleted it. They still thought this was a small procedural snag. They still didn't comprehend that they'd just detonated their own foundation, and were now standing in the crater wondering why the ground had disappeared. Over the weekend, I kept myself busy with productive tasks. Cleaned out my garage. Fixed the leaky faucet I'd been ignoring for 6 months. Registered Steadfast Consulting LLC online. Took about 15 minutes and cost me $150. Business license, federal tax ID, professional liability insurance. Just like that, William Patterson, the disposable employee, became William Patterson, the independent contractor. Monday morning brought the email that officially ended Cortex corporate dreams, to whom it may concern. Due to the unplanned termination of the authorized third-party liaison without proper replacement protocols, Macrovia Group is formally suspending all execution phases of the proposed acquisition. Federal compliance obligations under Regulation 4.7 and Clause 9C remain unmet pending resolution. Transaction status indefinitely postponed. We regret this development and wish all parties success in their future endeavors. 4 sentences that vaporized $300 million and sent Cortex stock price into free fall. The business news picked it up within hours. Ohio tech firm loses key personnel mid-merger, deal collapses. They didn't name Cortex specifically in the headline, but anyone following the industry could connect the dots. The article mentioned critical compliance failures and personnel management oversight in language that made it clear someone had screwed up badly. That afternoon, my phone rang, Brian Hayes calling directly. I decided to answer this time. Will, thank God you picked up. Look, I think there's been some kind of serious misunderstanding here. We need to make this right, whatever it takes. Good to hear from you, Brian. Though, I should mention I'm no longer a Cortec employee. I'm running my own consulting practice now. Right, yes, I understand that, but surely we can work something out here. You built these compliance systems, you know them better than anyone else. Alive. We need your expertise. Name your price. I looked out my home office window at my neighbor's perfectly maintained lawn, then at the rate sheet I'd just finished drafting for Steadfast Consulting. My consulting rate for specialized federal compliance work is 4 times what you were paying me as a salaried employee. 6-month minimum contract, payment in advance, no exceptions. Long pause. 4 times? Well, that's a significant premium. That's market rate for emergency compliance consulting when you've terminated the only qualified specialist in the middle of a federal acquisition process. Supply and demand, Brian. Basic economics. We'll need to discuss this with the board of directors. Take all the time you need, but understand that every day you delay, Macrovia becomes more comfortable with walking away permanently. They've already moved on to evaluating other acquisition targets. Other targets? Will, you can't be serious. Completely serious. Andrew Foster mentioned they're looking at 2 companies in California with similar technological capabilities but better organizational stability. Their words, not mine. They took the contract, full payment in advance. 6 months guaranteed at 4 times my previous salary with option to extend. 3 months into the consulting arrangement, a package arrived at my house. Small wooden box with Macrovia's corporate logo laser engraved into the lid. Inside was a brass compass and a handwritten note, for the man who knew true north when everyone else was spinning in circles. Thank you for your professionalism throughout a difficult situation. AF, Macrovia Group. I placed it on my desk next to my Marine Corps Challenge coin and the framed photo of my kids from their college graduations, events I'd actually been able to attend since becoming my own boss. The best part wasn't the money, though the money was excellent. It was the respect. When Steadfast Consulting sent invoices, they got paid immediately. When I scheduled meetings, executives showed up on time and prepared. When I made recommendations, companies implemented them without argument. Turned out being essential was considerably more profitable than being employee of the month. 6 months later, Sean texted me with an update. Heard Brian got reassigned to special projects, basically managing the office coffee inventory. New CEO started Monday. She actually reads the legal documentation before making decisions. Imagine that. I smiled and typed back, not karma, just physics. Remove the foundation, building falls down. Speaking of foundations, he replied, they're asking if Steadfast Consulting would consider a long-term contract for all their compliance work. Apparently nobody else wants to touch their legal framework after what happened. Tell them I'll think about it. My rates have gone up since the last contract. How much? 5 times the original salary now. Premium pricing for premium expertise. The truth was, I wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires energy I'd rather spend on more profitable activities. I wasn't even particularly satisfied with their suffering. Corporate executives create their own misery through bad decisions. They don't need my help with that process. What I felt was something much better than satisfaction. I felt valuable. For 12 years, I'd been the invisible guy fixing problems nobody else understood, working nights and weekends to keep their systems functional, sacrificing personal time to meet their impossible deadlines. They'd treated my expertise like a commodity they could discard and replace whenever convenient. Now they understood the difference between essential and replaceable. My phone buzzed with another consulting inquiry. A tech company in Denver needed emergency compliance review for a federal contract. 3-week timeline, complexity rating through the roof. Previous consultant had quit halfway through the project. I leaned back in my chair, checked my calendar, and smiled. The schedule was completely booked for the next 4 months. Success had its own momentum. I opened my laptop and started drafting a response. Steadfast Consulting appreciates your interest. Our next availability is January. Rate is 6 times standard industry pricing for emergency federal compliance work. Payment in full before project initiation. Please confirm if these terms are acceptable. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply becoming too expensive to ignore and too valuable to mistreat. They thought they could throw me away like outdated software, but they forgot one crucial detail. You can't delete the person who holds all the access codes. And me? I wasn't just expensive now, I was irreplaceable. Steadfast Consulting, LLC, compliance without compromise. Turned out professional competence had quite the profit margin attached to it. And that, my friends, was a lesson worth every penny they'd ever pay me.